So what is a complex number? A complex number is a number that we can write like this, a plus bi. It has two parts. It has a real part and it has an imaginary part. And the imaginary part is indicated by the I. So because it has a real part and imaginary part, and a and b are real numbers. They're constants. So because it has an imaginary part, if b was 0, then it would just look like a, which is a real number. So the real numbers are a subset of the complex numbers. Well, where do the imaginary numbers come from? The imaginary numbers came from when we were trying to understand maybe what the square root of -4 was. So we can rewrite the square root of -4 as the square root of -1 times the square root of 4. And we know that square root of 4 is 2. The definition for the square root of -1 is I, which I believe that you've learned of before. So I stands for imaginary numbers. So I is the square root of -1. And if I want to remember some of my operations with I squared is -1 because it's the square root of -1 squared. And when squaring takes away the square root, which just gives us -1. So we already know how to find our real zeros. But when complex numbers come in, we want to find zeros where we can't really find the answer. So let's look back. Let's say I had the graph of x squared plus 2. Now, so first of all, if I had the polynomial x squared plus 2, it crosses the axis at 2 and it goes like this. So it never crosses the x-axis. If I wanted to find a zero, it would be x squared plus 2 equals 0. And if I was to solve, it becomes x squared is -2, or x is the square root of -2. So I still have a 0, but it really equals 2i. But what was wrong with what I did here? If I take a square root always has two answers. It always has a positive and a negative root, right? Because a positive times a positive is 0, and a negative times a negative is 0. So really I have 2i and -2i are my two roots, which makes sense because remember we have two zeros. This is actually an all imaginary number, so in this case my a is 0 and I just have a bi and bi, so b would be 2 or -2. So I have 2i or -2i.